The first question is relates to a problem we're all really aware of, particularly in the 9th District, but also in much rural America, and it goes to Mr. Placavento and Anthony. The impact of drug overdose deaths is increasing all across the country and affects everyone. What solutions would you propose to combat this catastrophe?
Certainly, that is a huge, huge problem across the 9th District. And my understanding of it is we have to really take on both prevention, stopping the flow of opioids in the first place, or reducing the flow to a manageable level, and then moving from incarceration approaches to treatment approaches. First, on prevention. We still, in 2015, even though the rates have been coming down, according to a study from the CDC, we're prescribing 3 times more opioids now than just in 1999. Kim, do I have 2 minutes? I think I have 2 minutes for the question. No? That would be useful to know. I think I have 2 minutes for the first question. I didn't want to talk that fast. So we really have to deal with that. We're still overprescribing. It's happening certainly in some notorious pill mills, but just as a general rule, the length of prescriptions is too long. We need to tackle that as part of prevention. We also need to hold big pharma accountable. Let's be honest. We've all heard the studies about Purdue and others and how they have marketed these drugs deceptively, downplaying their addictive qualities. Both of those things would be part of the prevention strategy. Now, treatment, there's a lot of emerging and exciting opportunities, from drug courts to medically assisted treatment programs. They work. The problem is we don't make them accessible. Some author said it's much easier to get high than it is to get help. So we need to invest in the clinics, invest in the kind of care that's going to enable people, like what I saw in the Giles County Drug Court, to actually be able to get their lives back together, to overcome their addiction, and to start functioning again in society.
Well, I want to ask a follow-up. Do you see any connection between the drug companies advertising and the increase in our dependence on opioids?
Oh, no question. That dependence, it parallels what the tobacco companies did for all those years. When they first of all denied that there was any real problem with tobacco, either its addictive problems or its problems on health, for many, many years, in spite of the evidence. Same sort of pattern with the big pharma companies, absolutely. And again, they have pushed those drugs out there with massive marketing campaigns and with incentives to healthcare professionals to provide those. So absolutely, a very strong connection, and that needs to be reined in.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Pietro, I'm sorry.
Same question, correct?
Yeah, same question, but help me with your name.
Santo Pietro.
Santo Pietro.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a hard one, so I just go by Justin. That's why our stuff just says Justin, and my last name is in tiny font. Just 2 weeks ago, I was up in Wise County, and I was talking to a gentleman, a young man, not much older than me, who had struggled with opioid addiction for 3 years, and he was actually, when we met him, 3 years clean. And so he was a success story, but the way that he got into the addiction in the first place was, in my view, the result of a policy failure. And that was, as an 18-year-old high school student, he got caught with marijuana. And he was put on probation, which means he had to take a monthly urine test to make sure he wasn't on drugs. So because he couldn't take marijuana, because the THC stays in your system for 30 days, a friend of his came up and said, "Hey, you want to get high? I have this pill for you. It'll flush out of your system in 3 days." So in his case, he got hooked on opioids because marijuana was illegal. And that one pill sent him on a 3-year, really hard struggle to get off of those drugs. And I can't help but thinking, if the policies on cannabis and marijuana had been a little more proactive at the time, he might not have gotten into that spiral. The reason that these drugs are so prolific and have just poured into these areas is the result of the power of special interest and money in Washington. This is something that affects just about every policy issue that we deal with, but it's especially relevant here because the DEA, the FDA, the federal agencies, the protector agencies that are supposed to be cracking down on these doctors that are overprescribing, and the pharmaceutical companies that frankly lied about their effects all through the 90s, don't have the resources they need to adequately enforce the legal authority they already have. And that's because the drug industry wants it that way. They're constantly attacked. They're constantly under very scrupulous review from members of Congress who take a lot of money from this industry. And of course, the political appointees now from the Trump administration are atrocious. They're not going to do anything about this crisis. So as a congressman, I would focus a lot on the oversight of these agencies so they have the resources and the time to do their job.
Let me ask a follow-up, if I could. You know, from your answer, it sounds like you would support delisting marijuana as a class.
Correct.
And would you leave it to the states, or would you have a policy that exists nationwide?
Yeah, I would, as a federal congressman, I would want that taken off of the federal list. And the reason is that a lot of the struggles, having worked in the financial services world, all banks, whether they're chartered at state or federal level, are part of the Federal Reserve System, which means they have to follow federal law. So even if states legalize it, it's still very difficult for these dispensaries and these marijuana businesses to use the banking system. So a lot of them have to deal exclusively in cash. They have massive amounts of cash just sitting around. It's very dangerous. So it has to be at the federal level to make it an actual functional system. So it actually comes off the street and can become a legitimate business.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay. Save your call for the end so we can get some more questions. The next question, do we alternate? Okay. The next question goes to Justin, and I've got another related. I want marijuana. I want you, Anthony, to have a chance to address marijuana too, but we'll talk about it later. Justin, in the wake of yet another gun violence tragedy, there's once again a movement to stop this from ever happening again. This time it's being led by teenagers in Florida. A big part of the problem is how little we actually know about gun violence, in large part because of an amendment adopted in Congress in 1996, the Dickey Amendment, which prohibits gun violence study. What course of action would you propose to seek short-term and long-term solutions to preventing gun violence?
Yeah, so it's been, the last 2 weeks or 12 days have been pretty amazing to see the activism and the power of these young high school students putting themselves in front of national media and saying enough is enough. So maybe this time will be the straw that breaks the camel's back and we can make some progress. But the reason, as we all know, that we haven't been able to is because the National Rifle Association is so powerful. They have frankly, they have a large network of supporters and they have a lot of money that they give to politicians. And because of things like gerrymandering and these very far-right districts, if any Republican even hints at the idea of doing something on gun control, the NRA immediately threatens them with a primary. And sometimes they're afraid that they might actually lose. So this is the power of that organization is atrocious. It is gone far beyond just advocating for gun rights. It is a right-wing political organization, and it has to be treated as such from now on. It does not represent all gun owners. It doesn't represent hunters or sportsmen. It represents mostly the industry and their desire to make money. The things that I support, I think we can have a common, there's a lot of support in the gun community for actually fixing the background check system. It's a federal system that's already in place, but it has so many holes, both in the reporting side and in the checking side. So I've been to these gun shows. I've seen the booths that are there that everyone is supposed to go to if they're doing a private sale to do the check. And yeah, the booth is there, but I don't know how many FBI agents or ATF agents are actually there walking around making sure that people are doing these checks. We have no idea, again, because these agencies don't have the resources they need. So we need to improve the background check system from start to finish. I think we can also come to some serious agreement on limiting the size of these magazines. Now, everyone who hunts, every sportsman, everyone who cares about actually being an accurate shooter they know they don't need 10, 20 rounds, right? If you're a hunter, if you miss your first shot, that's kind of it. You don't need 8 more in your magazine, right? So this is something that we can come to agreement on. These extended mags are very dangerous and they basically only serve the purpose of creating a lot of human damage.
Question, what course of action would you propose to seeking both short-term and long-term solutions to preventing gun violence?
Yeah, absolutely. So very similar policy. The one thing that seems to be actually debatable right now is the background check system, the need to strengthen it, the need to integrate it. We heard the example of the shooter in Texas who the Army knew was a domestic violence perpetrator and was otherwise should not have held a gun, but somehow that did not make it into the overall federal database. So syncing and integrating all of the databases. It's also we need some changes. For instance, right now, if you are convicted of domestic violence, theoretically at least, you are prohibited from purchasing a firearm. But if you are stalking your girlfriend and beating her up, but you're not in a formal relationship, you can still get a firearm. So there needs to be ways to close those very serious things, because again, we know of these horrific mass shootings. They're far more common in the United States than just about anywhere else. And at the same time, there's dramatically more people being killed by guns day in and day out through domestic violence, through problems in our towns and cities. So the background check system is number one. The other thing we have to do right off the bat is just say what's true, which is that our federal policy for the last generation about guns, for the reasons Justin went into with the NRA, has been very explicitly to do nothing. So the time is now to say we got to do something, and we should do several things. The background check system, limits on the firepower. And the firepower isn't just AR-15s. There's all kinds of guns out there with tremendous firepower. The third thing is remove that ridiculous 1996 policy that prohibited the federal government from studying the causes of gun violence. And then the last thing I'd say is to put more resources into mental health, more resources into domestic violence prevention and protection, and the other things that are often contributors to this problem as well.
Okay. Why don't you can just stay up there if you want, because the next question, how would you recommend educating our region, specifically Southwest Virginia's students, to be critical thinkers, broadly educated, and employable with current tech skills? Can we have it all? Can we have the economy we had and a new economy? Well, what do you propose for revolutionizing our economy?
So in terms of the education piece of that, this past Monday I had a little town hall with folks in Washington County, teachers in Washington County, about a dozen came out for that. And I said a couple words about myself, and then I just said, so what are your issues in education? What do you think is wrong, and what are your ideas for fixing it? And we had 45 minutes of a floodgate of both concerns, frustrations, and ideas to fix things. And this is what's common. My wife Lori taught public school for over 30 years, and we do know how to make education more successful. Number one of the things these teachers said is the federal government has got to stop giving schools mandates, especially mandates about passing certain standardized tests on which the teachers, the students, and the schools are evaluated, giving mandates without giving resources. We should really flip that around. The federal government should be investing much more in public schools, particularly to lift up struggling schools in rural and urban areas, and then simultaneously should be freeing up teachers, who after all are education professionals, to do what they do well. And that would mean moving away from this standardized approach to hands-on learning, to experiential learning, to what's called project-based assessments. We can do these things, we should do these things, because whether it's technical education, learning existing skills like welding and carpentry and electricians, or whether it's learning new skills, 21st century tech skills, or whether it's even the arts and all of those expressive parts of education, what we know is that students learn better, the learning lasts longer when they're allowed to fully engage, bring their own experience in. That works. That's the model the federal government should be setting, along with additional resources.
Okay. Justin, why don't you give a shot at that? What would you do to, what would you recommend for educating our students for today's workforce?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why our schools struggle so much, especially in rural America, is because we're still stuck in this 18th century model of school funding, which is based on local property taxes. So what happens when a big economic employer leaves the area? The property taxes go down, people move out, and they have less money for the schools. So I think we should start to transition away from this model. That's why I proposed in my education platform a $3,000 per student per year grant from the federal government directly to the school districts, not through the states, but directly to the school district, so they can have those funds to create as many, a broad spectrum of classes as possible. Now, I understand the drive for STEM and vocational education, right? That's fine. But I am adamant that we have to have well-rounded students coming out of our schools. And that means you have to keep the art classes, you have to keep music, you have to keep shop, you have to keep recess and gym and all those things that make for well-rounded students. And I was fortunate in Montgomery County. It was we had a lot of those types of classes and advanced placement classes, but I know that's not the case in many parts of the district because of this ridiculous funding model that we're still stuck on. And as Anthony said, even from the very beginning, I despise standardized tests, whether it's SATs, SOLs, LSATs. I like to say that standardized tests produce standardized people. And we don't need more of that in this country. We need people who are critical thinkers, who have creativity, because really that's our strength in the United States, is that we have people who think like that. That's why we have the most entrepreneurs per capita. That's why we own all the patents, even for the stuff that's made abroad. We own the patents for those things because we are creative people. And we cannot stop investing in the ability of students to do that. And in fact, in my experience, those artistic classes or vocational classes are the reason why a lot of people go to school. And some kids stay in school because they know they'll have at least an hour a day to do something that they like. So the fact that we're cutting these programs is unacceptable, and we need to get that federal funding in there to keep those programs going.